I remember the exact moment Olivia decided to blow up our marriage. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. I had just walked in from work, ready to drop my bag and unwind, when she looked up and casually said, "Marcus, I want a divorce." No preamble, no softening the blow, just a blunt, heartless statement delivered as if she were commenting on the weather. I froze for a second, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice calm despite the storm brewing inside me. "I said, I want a divorce," she repeated, with a tone that suggested I was somehow too slow to comprehend the first time. I should have been angry, maybe even devastated. Instead, I was struck by her sheer audacity. Divorce? After everything we'd been through together? And the reason? That's what hit me the hardest. "I can't keep living like this," she continued, crossing her arms. "I need someone who actually works, who contributes. This isn't the life I signed up for." I blinked. Doesn't work? I wanted to laugh, but I kept my composure. For years, I'd built my career from the ground up, earning a six-figure salary and setting us up for a future most people could only dream of. But Olivia? She never bothered asking about my work, never showed the slightest interest in how I made my money. I guess she thought I was just coasting along, barely getting by. I leaned against the counter, studying her. She seemed so sure of herself, so confident that she was making the right decision. "All right," I said simply, setting my bag down. She tilted her head, surprised. "All right. Yes, Olivia. If you want a divorce, I won't stop you." For a moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face, but she quickly replaced it with that smug, self-assured smile I'd grown so used to. "Good. Because I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll need to move out by the end of the month." Move out? Of my house? The nerve of this woman was almost comical, but I didn't argue. If she wanted me gone, I'd leave, for now. "Fair enough," I replied, turning to head upstairs. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to explode, to beg, to argue. But I gave her nothing. In the privacy of our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the situation sink in. This wasn't about divorce. This was about power. Olivia wanted to feel in control, to paint me as the failure in our relationship. And maybe she thought she could guilt me into fighting for her, pleading for a chance to win her back. But she didn't know me as well as she thought she did. The days that followed were a masterclass in passive-aggressive behavior. Olivia suddenly had a lot to say about everything, from how I folded the laundry to the way I spent my evenings. She criticized my hobbies, my habits, even the way I brewed my coffee. It was as if she were trying to justify her decision by turning me into the villain. And then there was Brian, my so-called best friend. At first, I didn't think much of the way she kept mentioning his name. Brian said this, or Brian suggested that. But soon, it became clear he was more than just a friend in her eyes. I didn't confront her. I wasn't ready to tip my hand. Instead, I let her think she was in control. I let her believe I was the passive, clueless husband who wouldn't see what was happening right under his nose. One evening, as I packed a suitcase with a few essentials, Olivia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed and a smirk on her face. "So, have you figured out where you're going to stay?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. I zipped up the bag and turned to face her. "Don't worry about me, Olivia. I'll be just fine." She huffed, clearly annoyed by my calm demeanor. "Good. Because Brian and I are planning a dinner party here next weekend. It'd be awkward if you were still hanging around." Dinner party? In my house? With my best friend? The gall was almost impressive. "Don't worry," I said, shouldering the bag. "I'll be gone long before then." As I walked past her, I caught a glimpse of her smug smile. She thought she'd won. She thought I was slinking away in defeat. But what Olivia didn't realize was that she had just handed me the match to light the fuse. If she wanted to burn everything down, I was going to let her, and then I'd watch as the flames consumed her and Brian both. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting. It's silence. It's patience. It's letting the other person dig their own grave while you quietly prepare to bury them in it. And trust me, I was just getting started. Betrayal is an insidious thing. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or fireworks. No, it sneaks in quietly, disguised as casual conversations and harmless gestures until one day, you wake up and realize everything you thought was solid has been chipped away. Olivia's request for a divorce was the first crack. What followed was the steady crumble of everything I thought I knew about her and Brian. Yes, Brian. My best friend, or at least, the man who had held that title for years. I should have seen it coming, but hindsight is a cruel companion. At first, it was subtle. Olivia started mentioning Brian's name more often than usual. Brian said this, or Brian recommended that. She'd say casually over dinner. I'd nod, not thinking much of it. After all, he was a close friend to both of us. But as the weeks went on, his name slipped into our conversations more frequently, and with a certain warmth that made my stomach twist. The first real red flag came on a Saturday afternoon. Olivia had just come back from one of her lunches with Brian. She was laughing, her cheeks flushed in a way I hadn't seen in years. When I asked what was so funny, she waved me off with a dismissive, "Oh, it's just something Brian said." You wouldn't get it. I wouldn't get it? Since when had I been on the outside of our marriage, looking in? The answer, I realized, was far earlier than I'd cared to admit. I started noticing more. The texts she'd type with a sly smile and quickly lock her phone. The way she'd suddenly dress up more whenever she had plans with Brian. The excuses about how they were just friends, or how I was overthinking things. Overthinking? That's the favorite word of every guilty person trying to shift the blame. I still didn't confront her, though. What would have been the point? She'd only deny it, spin the narrative to make me look like the paranoid husband who couldn't handle her having male friends. So, I let her think I was blind, too preoccupied with my own life to notice hers unraveling. The real blow came when Brian showed up at my house uninvited. I was in the middle of packing, fitting my life into suitcases, as Olivia had so graciously requested, when I heard the doorbell. Opening it, I was met with Brian's ever-confident grin. He strolled in without waiting for an invitation. "Marcus, my man," he said, like we were still the closest of friends. "How's it going?" I stared at him, every ounce of patience in my body strained to its limits. "What do you want, Brian?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He leaned against the wall, all nonchalance and charm. "Just checking in. Olivia told me you were moving out, and I thought I'd see if you needed any help." Help. From the man who was quite literally moving into my life. The audacity was almost impressive. "I've got it handled," I replied curtly, turning back to my packing. Brian lingered, and when I glanced over, I could see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't just here to check in. He was here to rub it in, to stake his claim. "Listen," he said, his voice taking on a tone he probably thought sounded sincere. "I know this must be hard for you, but things happen, you know? Life's unpredictable." "Things happen," I echoed, turning to face him fully. I took a slow step closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Yeah, Brian, things do happen, and sometimes they come back to bite you." For the first time, he faltered. The confident smirk wavered, replaced by something almost resembling uncertainty. I didn't wait for him to recover. I turned back to my suitcase, effectively dismissing him. "You've always been a cool guy, Marcus," he said awkwardly, retreating toward the door. "No hard feelings, right?" I didn't respond. Silence is a powerful thing, especially when someone is desperate for a reaction. Brian left without another word, and as his car disappeared down the street, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That night, as I lay in the bed that would soon no longer be mine, I replayed the events of the past few months. The missed signals, the lies, the betrayal. I could have been angry, could have confronted them both and demanded answers. But what would that accomplish? They'd already written me off as irrelevant, a footnote in their story. What they didn't realize, though, was that I wasn't the passive, clueless husband they thought I was. I had been paying attention, taking mental notes, and carefully planning my next steps. If Olivia and Brian thought they could waltz off into the sunset together without consequences, they were in for a rude awakening. Because betrayal doesn't end when the truth comes out. No, that's when the real game begins. And as far as I was concerned, this was a game I was fully prepared to win. Divorce. It's such a clean word for something so messy. It implies finality, a simple end to a complicated story. But when Olivia and I walked into that courtroom, I realized this wasn't an ending for her. For her, it was a victory lap, a celebration of what she thought was her upgrade. She came dressed to impress, in a tailored dress that screamed sophistication and with a confident smile that made my stomach churn. And there, not too far behind her, was Brian, lurking like a shadow. He didn't come into the courtroom, of course. He wouldn't dare. But the fact that he was there at all said everything I needed to know. Olivia wasn't just divorcing me. She was flaunting her betrayal as if it were a badge of honor. "Marcus, let's not drag this out," she said when we sat down across from each other at the negotiation table. "I don't want this to be harder than it needs to be." Harder than it needs to be? The irony wasn't lost on me. She had already made it hard, stomping on years of marriage like it was a worn-out rug she couldn't wait to replace. "I don't plan to," I replied evenly, meeting her gaze without flinching. The lawyer laid out the terms. She wanted the house, some furniture, and a chunk of what she thought was my meager savings. She probably thought I'd fight her, maybe even beg for a better deal. But I didn't flinch. I agreed to every term, signing each document without hesitation. Olivia blinked at me, confused. "You're okay with all this?" "Why wouldn't I be?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "It's just stuff, Olivia. You can have it." For a split second, I saw the doubt creep into her expression, but she quickly covered it with a smug smile. She thought she'd won, that she was walking away with everything that mattered. What she didn't know was that the house wasn't mine to begin with. It was a rental under my name, something I'd used as a workspace when I first started freelancing years ago. And the savings she thought she was taking a piece of? That was just a fraction of my wealth. The real money was tucked away in investments, accounts she didn't even know existed. As the papers were signed and the process finalized, Olivia leaned back in her chair, satisfied. "Well, I'm glad we could handle this like adults," she said with a patronizing tone. I just nodded, fighting back the urge to laugh. A week later, I packed up my belongings and left the house she so desperately wanted. I left her everything she asked for. Furniture, decorations, even the expensive kitchen gadgets she'd never actually used. It wasn't worth the trouble to take any of it. Let her have her spoils. Brian, of course, wasted no time moving in. A neighbor texted me a photo of him unloading boxes into the house. Olivia standing on the porch with that same smug smile plastered across her face. They probably thought they were building their perfect little life together, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their view. What Olivia didn't know was that I'd already started gathering evidence of her affair with Brian months before the divorce. Photos, text messages, even a GPS history showing their frequent lunches at a nearby hotel. And while I could have used it to blow up the divorce proceedings, I decided against it. Why? Because dragging this out in court would only prolong the drama, and I wanted something far more satisfying. I wanted karma to take its course, and I wanted front row seats when it did. In the weeks that followed, I settled into my new life. My career continued to thrive, and my income grew even further as new opportunities rolled in. Meanwhile, Olivia and Brian were busy parading their relationship around town, convinced they were the picture of happiness. I didn't react. I didn't call. I didn't text. My silence was deafening, and I knew it would eat away at them eventually. One day, I received a message from a mutual friend. "Marcus, did you know Olivia's throwing a housewarming party? She and Brian are really leaning into this whole thing." I just chuckled to myself. Of course they were. Olivia was the type who needed validation from others, who thrived on the illusion of success. She didn't realize that her shiny new life was built on a foundation of lies, and that foundation was already starting to crack. As I sat in my new apartment that evening, looking out over the city skyline, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. Olivia thought she'd won, but she had no idea what she'd really lost. And Brian? Well, he was about to learn that taking something that wasn't his came with a price. I wasn't rushing. Revenge, after all, is a dish best served cold, and I was just getting started. I'm not sure what Olivia expected when she and Brian decided to make their affair official. Maybe she envisioned a picture-perfect life, complete with weekend brunches, romantic vacations, and the glow of a new relationship? If so, she was in for a rude awakening. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. I stayed quiet, of course. There was no need to intervene. They were digging their own graves just fine without my help. The first sign of trouble came through whispers from mutual acquaintances. A friend of mine mentioned that Olivia and Brian were already struggling to maintain their new dream life. She's hosting all these dinner parties, trying to show off, my friend said, but I hear Brian's been overspending, and they're behind on the bills. I wasn't surprised. Brian had always been the kind of guy who wanted the lifestyle without the work. He liked expensive suits, flashy cars, and fine dining, but he didn't have the discipline or the income to sustain it. Olivia, apparently, hadn't realized she'd traded financial stability for a man who was all show and no substance. Then there was the gossip about their arguments. They weren't the couple everyone thought they were. People talked about the shouting matches that could be heard through the walls of their rented house. Yes, rented. The house Olivia had been so smug about taking in the divorce was gone. She'd been forced to sell it after realizing she couldn't afford the upkeep. One day, I got a call from an old neighbor. "Marcus, you won't believe this," she said, barely able to contain her laughter. "Olivia and Brian had the landlord banging on their door this morning. They're behind on rent." I leaned back in my chair, a smile creeping onto my face. "Oh, how far behind?" 3 months, she said. "They're trying to act like it's no big deal, but you can tell they're struggling." It was poetic, really. The life they'd so proudly built on betrayal was crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. Meanwhile, I focused on my own life. My income had grown exponentially since the divorce, and I was busier than ever with new projects and opportunities. I poured myself into my work, building something real and lasting while Olivia and Brian stumbled through their hollow relationship. Then, out of the blue, Olivia reached out. She sent me a text one evening, pretending to be friendly. "Hi, Marcus. I hope you're doing well. Just wanted to check in and see how things are going for you." I stared at the message for a moment, debating whether to respond. I could feel the underlying desperation in her words. She wasn't checking in, she was fishing. Still, I decided to play along. "Things are great, Olivia," I replied. "Business is booming. How about you?" Her response came quickly. "Oh, Brian and I are doing well. Things are a bit tight financially, but we're managing." I almost laughed. Managing? That was putting it generously. The real kicker came a week later. I was leaving a client meeting when I spotted Olivia waiting outside the building. She looked different, tired, stressed, and not nearly as put together as she used to be. "Marcus," she called, her voice tinged with something I hadn't heard from her in years: uncertainty. I approached her, keeping my expression neutral. "Olivia, what brings you here?" She hesitated, fiddling with the strap of her purse. I wanted to talk. Things have been tough lately, and I thought maybe we could catch up." Catch up? I knew exactly what she wanted, but I wasn't about to make it easy for her. "I'm a little busy," I said, "but I hope things improve for you." She forced a smile, but I could see the cracks beneath it. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was karma at its finest. Olivia and Brian had thought they were trading up, but they didn't realize the price of their choices. Now they were stuck in a life they couldn't afford, struggling to keep up appearances while the walls closed in around them. The best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. They had done this to themselves, and I was content to watch from a distance as they reaped what they had sown. Their perfect little world was falling apart, and I hadn't even started my revenge yet. The thing about revenge is that it doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes, the sweetest victories are the ones where you don't have to say a word. You just let the truth do the talking, and the results speak for themselves. That's exactly what I did as I watched Olivia and Brian's carefully constructed fantasy life start to crumble. While they were busy trying to keep up appearances, I was thriving. My work had taken off in ways I hadn't even anticipated. Deals were closing left and right, and my annual income had climbed to over $513,000. I wasn't just doing well, I was flourishing. But I kept it quiet. There was no need to flaunt my success. Olivia had already dismissed me as the man who didn't work, And I was more than happy to let her hold onto that misconception. Why correct her when her ignorance worked so perfectly in my favor? Instead of focusing on them, I turned all my attention inward. I upgraded my apartment to a sleek, modern space in the heart of the city, a place that reflected my new life. Floor-to-ceiling windows, smart technology, and a view of the skyline that was nothing short of breathtaking. It was a home built on my own hard work, free of the bitterness and betrayal that had tainted the last one. My days were filled with meetings, projects, and opportunities that kept me sharp and engaged. My nights? Those were for me. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. Life felt lighter, freer, and full of potential. Of course, Olivia wasn't completely absent. Every now and then, I'd get a text or hear through mutual acquaintances about her and Brian's latest struggles. The unpaid bills, the arguments, the mounting debt. Apparently, they had tried hosting a dinner party at the rental, only to have the power cut off mid-evening because they hadn't paid the utility bill. Marcus, one friend laughed over the phone. You should have seen it. Olivia was mortified. Brian tried to play it off like it was a mistake, but everyone knew what was really going on. I didn't laugh, though. I just nodded, letting the satisfaction wash over me. This wasn't about schadenfreude or rubbing their failures in their faces. It was about balance. They had tipped the scales with their betrayal, and now life was evening things out. One day, I ran into Brian at a coffee shop. He looked haggard, his once polished appearance replaced by something more disheveled. He didn't see me at first, so I had a moment to observe. He was hunched over his laptop, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through what looked like job listings. When he finally glanced up and saw me, his expression shifted. There was no smugness, no bravado, just a flicker of embarrassment. Marcus, he said, standing awkwardly. Brian, I replied coolly. How's it going? He hesitated, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Good. You know, just busy with work and all that. Work, huh? I said, raising an eyebrow. That's good to hear. He laughed nervously, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, keeping busy. You know how it is. I just nodded, letting the silence stretch between us. He shifted uncomfortably before muttering something about needing to get back to his tasks and hurriedly excusing himself. That encounter told me everything I needed to know. Brian was struggling, and Olivia's perfect new life wasn't as perfect as she'd hoped. As the weeks went by, the messages from Olivia became more frequent. They were vague at first, just checking in, or hope you're doing well, but I knew what they really meant. She was testing the waters, trying to gauge if I'd be open to helping her out. I ignored most of them. The few I did respond to were short and polite, giving her nothing to work with. It wasn't long before her messages became more direct. Marcus, I know we've had our differences, but I could really use a friend right now. A friend. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had discarded me like yesterday's news, but now that her shiny new life was falling apart, she wanted a lifeline. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I didn't owe her anything. Olivia had made her choices, and now she was living with them. My silence spoke volumes. While she and Brian scrambled to keep their heads above water, I was soaring. Opportunities kept coming, my investments were thriving, and my life was filled with peace and purpose. I didn't need to confront Olivia or Brian. I didn't need to shout, accuse, or demand apologies. My success, my happiness, that was my revenge. And the best part? They knew it. They saw it in every ignored message, every passing rumor about my success, and every encounter where I walked away with my head held high while they scrambled to pick up the pieces. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above it all. And I had. Quietly, confidently, completely. The downfall of Olivia and Brian wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, crumbling mess of their own making. I watched it unfold from a distance, hearing bits and pieces from mutual acquaintances, and seeing the occasional post on social media. Each new update painted a clearer picture. They were drowning in their own hubris, and the water was rising fast. At first, Olivia tried to keep up appearances. She continued to post pictures of her and Brian at fancy dinners, vacations that looked far more luxurious than they likely were, and snapshots of their perfect life. But the cracks were starting to show. The dinners became less frequent, the vacations non-existent, and the smiles in their photos began to look forced. Then came the whispers. People started noticing that Olivia wasn't as put together as she used to be. Her once perfect hair and designer clothes were being replaced by cheaper alternatives. Brian, the ever-flashy showman, was now recycling outfits he used to wear only once. It wasn't long before the gossip turned into direct updates. One day, a mutual friend called me with the news. "Marcus, you'll love this," she said, barely containing her laughter. "Olivia and Brian are in some deep trouble. Apparently, they're months behind on their rent." I raised an eyebrow, surprised but not shocked. "Rent? I thought they owned that house." "Not even close," she said. "They've been renting it this whole time. Word is, they're on the verge of being evicted." I let out a small chuckle. It was poetic justice, really. Olivia had fought so hard to take that house in the divorce, only to find out she couldn't afford to keep it. The financial troubles didn't stop there. Another friend mentioned that Brian had been laid off from his job. He was still pretending to have everything under control, but it was clear he was scrambling. Olivia, for all her complaints about me not working, had never held a real job herself. Now, faced with mounting bills and no income, their perfect life was falling apart. One evening, as I sipped my coffee and scrolled through emails, I got a text from Olivia. "Marcus, I really need to talk to you. It's important." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a response. "Is everything okay?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Not really. Brian and I are going through a rough patch, and I was wondering if you could help. Just a little loan to get us through." A loan. From me. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. She had left me, ridiculed me, and flaunted her new relationship with Brian. And now she wanted my help? "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, "but I'm afraid I can't help." "I'm sure you'll figure it out." Her response was slow this time, and I could almost feel the frustration through the screen. "Marcus, please. Just this once. You don't have to make it a big deal." I didn't bother responding. There was nothing more to say. Olivia and Brian had made their bed, and now they were lying in it. The next piece of news came a week later. Olivia and Brian had officially been evicted. The landlord, apparently tired of their excuses, had given them a hard deadline, and they hadn't been able to meet it. They were forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town. "Marcus, I wish you could see it," the same mutual friend told me over the phone. "It's such a far cry from the life they were pretending to have. Olivia's barely holding it together, and Brian looks like he's aged 10 years. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their downfall wasn't about me. It was about the consequences of their own choices. Olivia had traded a life of stability and support for a fantasy that couldn't withstand reality. And Brian, well, he was reaping exactly what he'd sown. But the most telling sign came during another unexpected encounter. I ran into Olivia at a grocery store, her cart filled with store-brand essentials. She looked up, saw me, and froze. "Marcus," she said, her voice shaky. "Olivia," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. She looked defeated. The confident, smug woman who had demanded a divorce and flaunted her affair was nowhere to be found. "I hope you're doing well," I said, breaking the silence. She nodded quickly, her eyes darting away. "You too," she mumbled before pushing her cart down the aisle. As I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also pity. Olivia had made her choices, and they had led her here. This was the life she had fought so hard to create, and now she was trapped in it. I didn't need to say or do anything to make her regret what she'd done. Life had already taken care of that for me. And as I walked out of the store that day, I realized that sometimes karma doesn't need a push. It just needs time. It wasn't long before everything came to a head. I knew it was coming. It was inevitable. People like Olivia and Brian don't handle consequences well. When their carefully constructed illusion of success starts to crumble, they lash out, looking for someone to blame or someone to bail them out. One morning, as I was finishing up a client call, My phone lit up with a number I hadn't saved. But I knew it. Olivia. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up, keeping my tone calm. Marcus speaking. Her voice was tense, on the verge of cracking. Marcus, we need to talk. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. About what, Olivia? There was a pause, as if she were trying to find the right words. About everything. About Brian, about us. I raised an eyebrow, though she couldn't see it. Us? The nerve of this woman. Olivia, there is no us. That ended the day you handed me divorce papers. What's this really about? She hesitated again, her voice lowering. We're struggling, Marcus. Things haven't been easy since everything happened. I just thought maybe we could talk. Maybe you could help. Help. There it was. The real reason for her call. Help with what? I asked, feigning ignorance. Financially, she admitted, her tone filled with forced humility. Just a loan. To get us back on our feet. I couldn't help but let out a laugh. Olivia, you left me because you thought I wasn't good enough. That I didn't work hard enough, or make enough money for you. And now you want me to fix the mess you made? Her voice sharpened, defensiveness creeping in. You don't understand. Brian and I just hit a rough patch. A rough patch? I cut her off. Olivia, you made your choice. You left me for Brian. You thought he was the better option. And now, you want me to clean up after you? Not a chance. She started to protest, but I didn't let her. You wanted to be free, Olivia. Free of me. Free of my lack of ambition. So enjoy that freedom. I have no interest in being your safety net. I hung up before she could respond. The next encounter wasn't over the phone. It was in person. A week later, Olivia showed up at my office unannounced. She looked frazzled, her once polished appearance replaced by something much more desperate. Marcus, she said as she stepped into my office, ignoring my assistant's attempts to stop her. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. You've got 2 minutes. Make it count. She launched into a tirade about how difficult things had been for her and Brian, how the world had been unfair to them, and how she was only asking for a small favor. Olivia, I interrupted, you made your decisions. You left me for Brian, thinking you were upgrading your life. How's that working out for you? Her face flushed, anger and embarrassment mixing in her expression. Marcus, I know I hurt you, but you don't have to be so cruel. I thought you were better than this. Better than this? I laughed. You thought I was a failure, Olivia. You thought I wasn't good enough. Now you're here, begging me for help because your perfect life isn't so perfect after all. I owe you nothing. Just then, as if the universe wanted to drive the point home, Brian walked in. He must have followed her, because his timing was too perfect to be coincidental. He looked even worse than Olivia, disheveled, stressed, and clearly out of his depth. Marcus, he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice was shaky. Can we talk man to man? I stood up, walking around my desk to face him. Man to man? I echoed. You mean the same way you talked to me while sleeping with my wife behind my back? Save it, Brian. He winced but pressed on. Look, we made mistakes. But Olivia and I are in a tough spot, and we thought, maybe you'd be willing to help us out. Just a loan. Something small. I shook my head, laughing again. Unbelievable. You betrayed me, lied to me, and now you want me to bail you out? The audacity is impressive, I'll give you that. Brian's face turned red, his hands balling into fists at his sides. You don't have to be a jerk about it, Marcus. I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. I don't owe you anything, Brian. You made your bed. Now lie in it. Olivia reached out, her voice pleading. Please, Marcus. We're desperate. I turned to her, my voice calm but cold. Desperation doesn't erase betrayal, Olivia. You both made your choices, and now you're living with them. This conversation is over. Without another word, I walked to the door and opened it, gesturing for them to leave. They stood there for a moment, stunned, before shuffling out, their heads hanging low. As the door closed behind them, I felt a sense of closure. They had thought they could manipulate me, guilt me into helping them, but I was no longer the man they thought they knew. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about standing tall, knowing my worth, and refusing to let the people who betrayed me pull me down. And as I sat back at my desk, I couldn't help but smile. They thought they'd broken me. Instead, they'd set me free. The beauty of betrayal is that it has a way of turning on itself. Brian and Olivia thought they could escape the mess they created by sticking together, but the cracks in their relationship began to grow into full-blown fractures. It was almost poetic to watch them unravel under the weight of their own decisions. The first sign came from a mutual acquaintance, Carla, who always seemed to have her ear to the ground. She called me one afternoon, her voice practically dripping with gossip. "Marcus, you're not going to believe this," she began. "What now, Carla?" I replied, already amused by her dramatic tone. "It seems Brian has been, how should I put this, seeing someone else?" I laughed, a genuine belly laugh that I hadn't experienced in a while. "Seeing someone else? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," she said. Apparently, Olivia caught him texting another woman. Some young thing from his new job, if you can believe it. I shook my head. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Brian, the man who had betrayed me with Olivia, was now betraying her in the exact same way. Karma didn't just catch up with them. It ran them over. The fallout was swift. Olivia, who had always been so smug and self-assured, was now the one blindsided. From what I heard, she confronted Brian in a spectacularly public fashion, screaming at him in the middle of a cafe. He tried to brush it off. Carla continued, relishing every detail, said it wasn't a big deal, and Olivia completely lost it. She threw her coffee at him. I could almost picture it. Olivia, who had once gloated about leaving me for a better man, now reduced to throwing lattes in public. It was almost too good to be true. But it didn't stop there. The woman Brian had been texting wasn't just a random fling. She was someone he had met at his new job, and she was everything Olivia wasn't. Young, carefree, and completely uninterested in settling down. Brian, being the impulsive idiot he was, had convinced himself she was worth risking everything for. Olivia, of course, didn't take the betrayal quietly. She demanded answers, demanded Brian fix the mess he created. But Brian was Brian, and fixing things was never his strong suit. Instead, he doubled down, blaming Olivia for their financial troubles and accusing her of being too demanding. Their arguments became the talk of the town. Neighbors reported hearing shouting matches late into the night, and more than one friend told me about awkward encounters where Olivia would burst into tears mid-conversation. At one point, Brian moved out, leaving Olivia in their dingy apartment with no way to pay the rent. She called me again during this time, her voice shaking with anger and desperation. "Marcus," she started, not bothering with pleasantries. "You were right about Brian. He's a liar and a cheat, and I can't believe I trusted him." I leaned back in my chair, letting her rant. I could have offered her sympathy or said something conciliatory, but where was the fun in that? "Olivia," I said after she paused for breath, "you made your choice. You chose Brian over me, thinking he was the better man. How's that working out for you?" She was silent for a moment, and I could hear her breathing hard on the other end of the line. Finally, she muttered, "I don't need your lectures, Marcus. I need your help." "No," I replied firmly. "What you need is to learn to live with the consequences of your decisions." She hung up on me after that. From what I gathered later, Brian didn't come back. He moved in with his new girlfriend, who eventually realized he was just as unreliable as Olivia had. Last I heard, he was couch surfing, unable to hold down a job or a relationship. Olivia, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She had no job, no savings, and no one left to turn to. Her family had distanced themselves from her, tired of her constant drama, and even her friends had started to drift away. The very life she had fought so hard to build with Brian had turned to ash. And I didn't have to lift a finger. Karma had done all the work for me. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing that people like Olivia and Brian inevitably destroy themselves. They think they're clever, think they can manipulate and betray their way into happiness, but life has a way of humbling them. And while they were busy tearing each other apart, I was thriving. My work was flourishing, my life was peaceful, and my future was brighter than ever. The best revenge, they say, is living well. And by that measure, I had already won. The funny thing about hitting rock bottom, when you're the one betrayed, humiliated, and discarded, is that you find out just how resilient you really are. For me, the divorce wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A fresh start disguised as devastation. Olivia and Brian had burned the bridge behind them, but I was already building a better one ahead. After the divorce, I made one promise to myself. I wouldn't let their betrayal define me. I would rise above it, not just for the sake of revenge, but for the sake of my own peace. And that's exactly what I did. The first step was investing in myself. I upgraded my apartment to a sleek penthouse in the heart of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and a view that reminded me every day how far I'd come. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a statement, a symbol of my new life. My career, already stable, began to flourish in ways I hadn't imagined. Freed from the stress of Olivia's constant criticisms and Brian's backstabbing, I threw myself into my work with renewed focus. Clients noticed. New contracts poured in. My annual income skyrocketed, hitting $513,000 and climbing. And then there were the unexpected opportunities. My expertise and reputation in my field led to speaking engagements, partnerships, and investment offers. Every success felt like a quiet victory, a reminder that I was more than the man Olivia had underestimated. Socially, I began to rebuild as well. Old friends who had drifted away over the years reconnected. New friends entered my life, people who appreciated me for who I was, not what they could gain from me. I started attending events, networking with like-minded individuals, and even taking the occasional weekend trip just for fun. But the most significant change was internal. I learned to value myself in ways I never had before. For years, I had poured so much energy into keeping Olivia happy, trying to meet her impossible standards, that I had lost sight of my own worth. Now, I was reclaiming it. Therapy helped, too. I won't pretend I did it all on my own. Talking to someone impartial, someone who could help me process the betrayal and the lingering anger, was invaluable. My therapist once told me, "Marcus, you're not responsible for other people's choices. You're only responsible for how you respond to them." Those words became my mantra. And then there was my creative side. I'd always dabbled in writing and photography, but now I had the time and energy to take it seriously. I started a blog, part personal journal, part professional insights, that quickly gained traction. People resonated with my story of rebuilding, of turning pain into progress. Every now and then, I'd hear whispers about Olivia and Brian. Their downward spiral had become something of a cautionary tale among our old circle of friends. The latest updates were always the same. More debt, more drama, and more regret. Marcus, a mutual friend, once said over coffee, "I don't know how you're so calm about all this. If I were in your shoes, I'd be furious." I shrugged. What's the point? They're living their karma. I don't need to add to it. And it was true. Watching them flounder while I thrived wasn't just satisfying. It was liberating. I didn't need to chase revenge or wallow in resentment. I was too busy living well. Still, there were moments of reflection. Late at night, staring out at the city lights from my penthouse, I'd think about everything I'd been through. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger. It hadn't been easy to move past, but I had done it. And in the process, I discovered a version of myself I didn't even know existed. Stronger, wiser, more confident. Life didn't stop throwing challenges my way, of course. It never does. But I faced each one with a clarity and resilience I never would have had before. Losing Olivia and Brian was painful, but in hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. They hadn't just left, they'd freed me. Now, every day felt like a step forward. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And the best part? I didn't need anyone's validation to prove it. I had built a life I was proud of, surrounded by people who valued me, and filled with opportunities that excited me. My world was brighter, bigger, and better than anything Olivia and Brian could have imagined. And as far as I was concerned, the chapter with them was closed. This was my story now, and I was writing it exactly the way I wanted.